The empire trap always follows the same arc. A nation fights hard to rise, gets rich from that effort, grows comfortable and entitled, then discovers too late that comfort has hollowed out the very strength that made it powerful. This script shows how that pattern played out in Rome, Spain, and Britain, and how the United States is now deep inside the same sequence. There is a trap in history that has swallowed every great empire that walked into it. It does not begin with invasion or defeat on the battlefield. It begins with success. Empires rise through struggle, discipline, sacrifice, and ruthless focus. Then they get rich, and that wealth, slowly and invisibly, changes who they are. The people who built the empire are not the same people who inherit it. The builders worked because they had to. The heirs stop working because they do not. Comfort replaces sacrifice. Entertainment replaces duty. Entitlements replace responsibility. And by the time anyone notices, the empire is soft, its rivals are hard, and the fall is already underway. This is the empire trap. Get strong, get rich, get lazy, then fall. It happened to Rome, it happened to Spain, it happened to Britain. And right now, in 2025, the United States is in the danger zone. Before looking at the three empires, the pattern itself needs to be clear. It has 4 stages. Stage 1 is the struggle. This is when a nation is poor, hungry, and ambitious. Its people work long hours. Its soldiers are drawn from citizens who believe the future depends on them. Failure means suffering, so failure is not an option. Stage 2 is the wealth. After decades or centuries of hard effort, the empire begins to dominate trade routes, resources, and technology. Money flows in. Cities grow. Armies are professionalized. Ordinary people enjoy rising living standards. The empire starts to look permanent. Stage 3 is the softening. This is the silent turning point. The children and grandchildren of the builders grow up surrounded by comfort. Work that was once honored becomes something to escape. The state promises more benefits, more subsidies, more security. Bread and entertainment replace duty and sacrifice. Fewer people produce, more people consume. Stage 4 is the fall. Rivals that are still in stage 1 or 2, still hungry, still willing to sacrifice, catch up and then overtake. The empire discovers that its armies are expensive but hollow, its economy looks large but rests on debt and imports, and its population is divided, distracted, and unwilling to endure hardship. At that point, collapse is fast. Now watch how this plays out 3 times in history. Rome, from farmer soldiers to bread and circuses. 2,000 years ago, Rome was the prototype empire. At its peak, it controlled territory from Britain to North Africa and from Spain to the Middle East. But Rome did not begin as a decadent superpower. It began as a grim, land-hungry republic of farmer soldiers. In the early republic, Roman citizens owned small farms, worked their own land, and served in the legions. Military service was a duty tied directly to property and citizenship. Campaigns were brutal, but the rewards were clear: land, security, and the chance to rise. This was stage 1, the struggle. Victory after victory brought stage 2. As Rome conquered Carthage, Greece, and the wealthy eastern kingdoms, staggering amounts of wealth poured into Italy. War captives became slaves. Grain, gold, and luxury goods flowed to Rome. Senators and generals enriched themselves with captured land and contracts. The city's population exploded, fed by imports from conquered territories. Then the trap began to spring. The same wealth that made Rome powerful started to make Romans soft. Cheap slave labor undercut small farmers, who lost their land and drifted into the city. The government began providing free or heavily subsidized grain to keep urban masses fed. Public spectacles in huge arenas distracted citizens from politics and hardship. The phrase "bread and circuses" captured the new reality. Keep people fed and entertained, and they will not resist. By the late empire, the Roman legions were no longer made up largely of citizen farmers. Increasingly, they were recruited from non-Roman provinces and hired as mercenaries. Tax burdens soared to fund the bureaucracy and army. Productive citizens were squeezed, while a growing class expected benefits without contribution. The people who had once fought and farmed now demanded protection and comfort, and resented the sacrifices those demands required. The final stage came quickly. Germanic tribes that had once begged to serve Rome now realized the empire was weak. They had retained martial cultures. Rome had not. When they crossed the frontiers in larger and larger groups, the imperial center could not respond effectively. In 410, Rome itself was sacked. By 476, the Western Empire was gone. The people who inherited Rome were softer than the people who had built it, and history punished that difference. Spain, drowning in silver, starving in production. Jump forward more than 1,000 years to Spain in the 1500s. After Columbus reached the Americas, Spain conquered vast territories in the New World. The Aztec and Inca empires fell. Spanish administrators seized the richest silver and gold mines ever discovered. Ship after ship crossed the Atlantic loaded with treasure. By 1600, Spain was receiving hundreds of tons of silver per year from the Americas. Its coin, the Spanish real, became the dominant currency in Europe and across much of the world. Spanish kings could fund huge armies, massive palaces, and global fleets. On paper, no one was richer. Spain had reached stage 2, overwhelming wealth. But like Rome, that wealth masked rot. When money is easy, production becomes optional. Why build ships when they can be bought from Dutch shipyards? Why develop textile industries when fine cloth can be imported from England or Italy? Why invest in local manufacturing when imported goods can be paid for with silver? Spanish elites began to look down on manual labor and commerce. Nobles prided themselves on not working. The culture rewarded proximity to court and church, not entrepreneurship or innovation. Domestic industries withered under the flood of easy money and imported goods. Spain became a pass-through point. Silver arrived from the Americas and quickly flowed out again to pay for foreign products. Meanwhile, inflation ate away at the domestic economy. As more silver flooded Europe, prices rose. Rents and taxes squeezed peasants, while the nobility and church hoarded privileges. Economic strain and social tension rose. When silver output eventually declined and wars drained the treasury, Spain had almost no productive base left to fall back on. Rivals who had not relied on easy treasure, like the Dutch and the English, had spent the same centuries building trade networks, industries, and maritime power. They were still in stages 1 and 2, hungry, inventive, and willing to work. Spain was deep in stage 3, rich, entitled, and hollow. Within a few generations, it went from world-striding empire to second-tier power. The empire trap had sprung again. Britain, from workshop of the world to dependent ally. Britain's empire reached its height in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The country had led the Industrial Revolution, built a navy that controlled sea lanes, and assembled a global empire where the sun never set. British manufacturers supplied the world. London was the financial center of the planet. The pound sterling functioned as the primary reserve currency. This was stage 2 at full power. Immense wealth, global reach, and a deep sense of national superiority. But the foundation had been laid earlier when Britain was still in stage 1, when entrepreneurs, inventors, and workers endured harsh conditions to build factories, railways, and ships. Their grandchildren inherited a different world. As the 20th century progressed, Britain fought 2 ruinous world wars. The economic and human cost was staggering. After 1945, the country was victorious, but exhausted and heavily indebted. At the same time, a new attitude had taken hold at home. Having endured hardship, many people understandably wanted security and comfort. The political system responded with a rapidly expanding welfare state. Government assumed responsibility for cradle-to-grave benefits, healthcare, housing subsidies, and generous social programs. Many of these measures addressed real suffering, but they also carried a long-term cost, rising dependence on the state and a shrinking culture of self-reliance. High taxes, powerful unions, and layers of regulation slowly eroded competitiveness. By the 1960s and 1970s, once world-leading British industries were struggling against leaner, hungrier competitors in Germany, Japan, and elsewhere. Strikes were common. Productivity lagged. The attitude that tough work was beneath people, or that the state would always provide, crept into more corners of society. The empire had made Britain rich. That very richness sapped the will and flexibility needed to stay ahead. The loss of empire followed. India gained independence in 1947. One colony after another left. The Suez Crisis in 1956 exposed that Britain could no longer project power without American permission. By the 1970s, Britain was a former empire, wrestling with inflation, stagnation, and self-doubt. It remained an advanced country, but the age of global dominance was over. Again, the sequence was clear: struggle, wealth, softening, decline. The United States, inside the trap. Now consider the United States. In 1945, America emerged from World War II as the dominant industrial and military power. Its factories were intact, while Europe and Asia lay in ruins. Its currency, the dollar, became the core of the new financial system. Its middle class grew rapidly. For a time, this looked like the beginning of a permanent American century. The generation that built that dominance had lived through the Great Depression and global war. They saved money, worked long hours, and believed in sacrifice. This was stage one turning into stage two: intense effort rewarded by unprecedented wealth. But as with Rome, Spain, and Britain, the children and grandchildren of that generation grew up in a different reality. They experienced comfort as normal, security as expected, and rising living standards as a kind of birthright. Entitlement expanded, government programs grew. The idea that the state should provide for more and more needs took hold. Over the last few decades, this shift has accelerated. A growing share of the population receives government benefits of one kind or another. Large portions of healthcare, retirement income, and basic necessities are subsidized or paid for by the state. At the same time, labor force participation among working-age men has fallen. Many people have left the workforce entirely on disability or other programs. The cultural expectation that every able adult should work has weakened. Physical and mental resilience have also eroded. Obesity has risen to levels no prior society has ever seen. Chronic disease is widespread. Drug overdoses claim tens of thousands of lives every year. Many young people report high levels of anxiety and depression, and a sizable number disengage from work, family formation, or civic life. These are classic markers of a society that has grown inward, distracted, and less capable of sustained effort. Economically, the United States has shifted from broad-based manufacturing to a mix of services, finance, and high technology. That transition is not inherently bad, but in practice it has meant that much physical production has been outsourced to countries still in stages 1 and 2, nations like China, Vietnam, and others whose populations are still hungry and willing to work for less. The empire trap is visible here. Rather than maintain the hard, unglamorous work of making things, the U.S. has leaned on its currency's special status, its legacy industries, and its ability to borrow. Debt has exploded. Consumption remains high even as production relocates abroad. Many Americans live materially comfortable lives funded in part by borrowing from the future. Culturally, entertainment dominates attention. Just as Rome had its arenas, modern America has omnipresent digital distraction. Hours that might have gone to learning, building, or organizing now vanish into screens. Political life has polarized into bitter tribal conflict, making coherent, long-term reform almost impossible. When societies reach this stage, history shows they rarely turn around voluntarily. In short, the United States has experienced the same progression: struggle, wealth, softening. The fourth stage, serious decline or outright fall, likely will not look exactly like Rome's sack or Spain's bankruptcies. It may come through a currency crisis, loss of global influence, internal fragmentation, or some combination of these. But the underlying mechanism is the same: a nation that no longer behaves like the one that earned its position. Why the trap is so hard to escape? The empire trap is not a conspiracy. It is the result of human nature and incentives. Hard times create habits of discipline, cooperation, and sacrifice. Those habits build prosperity. That prosperity, if not managed carefully, creates generations that assume it will always exist. They push for more benefits, more leisure, and less risk. Politicians respond by promising exactly that. Reversing the process would mean telling people that comfort must be reduced, benefits must be cut, and effort must increase again, all in exchange for avoiding a disaster that has not fully arrived. Historically, very few societies accept that trade-off willingly. Most ride the curve all the way to the crash. Rome did not decide to give up bread and circuses. Spain did not voluntarily abandon imported luxuries to rebuild local industry. Britain did not dismantle its welfare state in time to preserve its empire. They all discovered, too late, that the people living at the end were not the same as the people at the beginning, and that their institutions had been reshaped to serve present comfort rather than future survival. The United States now faces the same choice in theory, but in practice that choice may already be behind it. The habits of comfort, division, and dependence are deeply embedded. Debt levels and demographic trends are locked in for decades. History suggests that the empire trap, once entered, is rarely escaped. The closing warning. Great nations do not fall because they were never strong enough. They fall because, after becoming strong, they use that strength to buy comfort instead of renewal. The people who inherit empires think they are special. They assume someone else will always farm, fight, and produce for them. They are wrong. Rome learned that when hardened outsiders marched through gates defended by men who no longer believed enough to die for their city. Spain learned it when poorer but more disciplined rivals took over the seas and trade routes it had once dominated. Britain learned it when it could no longer afford its empire and had to watch it slip away. The United States is not immune to the laws that governed those empires. Wealth has made it comfortable. Comfort has made it softer. Softness, if left unchecked, will make it weak. And in a world where other nations are still in the struggle stage, weakness does not last long. That is the empire trap. How great nations get rich, get lazy, then fall. The pattern has repeated for thousands of years. The only real question is whether the latest empire will be the first to break it, or just another chapter in the same story. If you found this breakdown valuable, take a moment to like the video so more people can see it. And if you want to keep exploring how history, economics, and human nature shape the world we live in, subscribe. There's a lot more to uncover, and I'd love to have you with me for the next one. See you in the next video.